with impunity. So, not surprisingly, this pattern drove out 1 million Christians from Iraq even before ISIS showed up. So now we're down to under 200,000. Archbishop Warda, the Chaldean Catholic bishop in Erbil, told me. The other part of this genocide story, and again, I'm drilling down on this because genocide is the most horrific of all human rights atrocities. After the Jewish Holocaust, we vowed as a nation that we would never again be passive in the face of this kind of attack. In 2016, we succeeded in pressing the U.S. to designate, that's the Obama administration, to designate this as a genocide. And the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops joined us with this. But since then, no U.S. policies to aid the Christians followed. The U.S. government was indifferent for 3 years that the U.S. funded UN aid programs deliberately excluded Iraq's Christians, so that after the genocide, all our aid for Iraqis was being channeled through the UN, and the UN deliberately excluded them. USAID at that time claimed it was unconstitutional to use taxpayer-supported aid for a particular religious group, targeted genocide notwithstanding. Archbishop Warda, Catholic Chaldean Archbishop of Erbil in Kurdistan, Iraq, woke up one night to find 120,000 Christians on his doorstep begging for help. They had nothing. ISIS had taken everything. He had to feed them and clothe them and give them medicine and shelter them for the last 4 years. He has done it by going throughout the world, piece by piece, patching together a safety net for them. The Knights of Columbus have been tremendously helpful. Aid to the Church in Need, which is a pontifical organization based in Europe, that has been given them millions as well. Even Glenn Beck's charity, Nazarene, has given them $10 million. So he has managed, when the Christians showed up in Nineveh, the Kurds said, even though it was the same country, the Kurds are autonomous, they said to him, they're welcome to stay here, but you must take responsibility for them. We cannot feed them. And so, whereas the UN was given $2 billion in humanitarian aid by the United States, they gave it to the majority. They ran camps of, there's a Tari camp in Jordan on the border, has about 60,000 Sunni Muslims in it. They said that the Christians could get aid if they were willing to and qualified to move into the camp on an individual basis. These camps were infiltrated by ISIS, and not a single Christian agreed to do that, nor a Yazidi. Now aid is needed to revive their liberated towns. Vice President Pence thankfully heard our appeals to bypass the UN and directly aid these Iraqi communities. Last October, U.S. policy for Iraq finally changed 3 years after the genocide. Unfortunately, to this date, no aid has actually been received. We brought this to the Vice President's attention over the spring, and in the last month, in fact, and the Vice President ordered the USAID Director, Mark Reen, to go to Iraq, and he arrived in Erbil today. So we're still hoping that the 200,000 or so that are still remaining, the Christians, and about the 400,000 Yazidis, can be preserved. I mean, the Holy Father has called generally the situation of persecution of Christians worse than the early centuries of the Christian faith, worse than under the Romans. And he has also said more recently, he calls it an ecumenism of the blood, meaning that no Christians are spared. It doesn't matter which denomination or what their situation is with ISIS and with other extremists like ISIS, like Boko Haram in Nigeria or Al-Shabaab in Somalia, that they're all targeted for conversion or death. And he has recently said that the Middle East wouldn't be the Middle East without Christians. And I've heard that many times. Christians passionately believe that the Christians, this is the cradle of Christianity, been there for 2,000 years, and they've been these living communities. And there, I think Congressman Frank Wolf told me that he knows his Bible, he's a Presbyterian, that Iraq is mentioned more times in the Bible than any country other than Israel. But we're now looking in our lifetime of the extinction of this community if not, something's not done soon. So I will stop there. And, there's a lot that we can talk about. I'm interested in what you're interested in. And I also thought it would be interesting to talk about what ordinary Christians can do to help. So I'm going to sit down, and I thought we could have an informal, casual conversation. I see a question.
What I've recently done, I came across an article which I found very interesting in the newspaper, The Times, and it mentioned about China. One of your introduction was on China before you head off to the Middle East there. It seems like either 75 or 85% of the population in China is atheist. And that what is going on, of course, things what you had mentioned, a Christian cannot get a government job because you believe in God.
They use high-tech and regulatory measures to press people to give up their religion. They also use more brutal means, too, if it's out of sight.
That I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
But atheism, really, when you think about it, has been an issue from communism because under the Communist Manifesto, there was no God. Therefore, they're atheists. It happened in the Soviet Union. It's happening now in North Korea.
North Korea, yeah.
And I got a concern too that within our own country, I believe there was a decision which a couple atheists saw a cross and it demanded the cross be taken down. In fact, it went to to a court, and I believe they made it said that they recommended it be taken down. I worry about this because what makes the next step is why can't they just say that cross over there is offensive to me because
well, I think and in fact there is there are distinctions that the private property and public state property and crosses displayed, and those the cross means different things. Europe is going through this issue in Germany about even though many of the people there are atheists, they see it as an identity thing and they want to keep their crosses. Canada had a frightening case this month. I don't know if any of you heard about this, but it's a Christian school that wanted to open a law school. It was a Christian university. They wanted to open up a law school, and the courts went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and this month decided that they would not be accredited because they had a campus code that they had to stay consistent, the student body had to stay consistent with biblical or scriptural views on sex and marriage. And they said because of that, they would not be accredited, and therefore they could not have their law school.
This is in Canada.
This is in Canada. We're sort of going through this now with the cake, Masterpiece Cake that just won, and then there was the decision this week on the florist. The florist. And also the pregnancy crisis centers, where the case that was decided yesterday, I don't know if you talked about that last night or the night, but that's a big decision because this was compelled speech against the beliefs of the people providing the service of crisis pregnancies. So there is an intolerance on the part of secularists, and then we see this in an extreme measure. It's not at all comparable to what we're seeing here, but you do have to be vigilant. We have to protect our freedoms.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is a very, very powerful presentation.
Thank you.
Explain again the hang up with the UN for all the money they got and what happened.
Yeah, the UN just decided that, and I've had, there's various reasons given. There were false reasons given, and then there were hints of what the real reasons were. The State Department, would tell me things, and one of the, things they were saying that I think was a false reason was, well, we put our camps in the deserts, and the Christians aren't living in the desert; they're living in the cities. But that begs the question: why are you only putting your camps in the desert if the needy people aren't there? Or who lives in the desert? Nobody lives in the desert. That's where they're putting all of the Muslims in the desert too. Christians would have. They didn't even have to put up a camp, frankly, because Archbishop Warda has been taking care of this population, this community, for 4 years. What he wanted was someone to come in every day and make sure there was something to eat for these people. That day in and day out, for as long as they stayed, 4 years now, that there would be food delivered, and there never was. Never was. And they showed up with tarps and tents in the first month when people were living in the open you may have seen the pictures at the time, and the grass with nothing. And then the UN came in and gave them tarps and tents, and that was it. And that was the last I saw. The UN, they begged the UN to please come in, and we begged the UN, and I went up to New York. There's many of us that we work in. I always work in coalitions, and there are many of us who really, Congressman Chris Smith, a good Catholic man, who is chair of the Human Rights Subcommittee in Congress, who is demanding this, has held hearings on this, and Vice President Pence has intervened, and he said we're going to give direct aid, but that was back in October. That direct aid hasn't flowed yet, and there's bureaucratic resistance, and that's what he's facing, and he's trying to get over that now.
So our own government, then, in this case, is stopping this from happening.
The policy has changed, but the policy is being defied by, I don't know why. They call it bureaucratic slowness. That's how they explained it. But like I said, when we bird-dogged this as a coalition, because we had a whole coalition that we formed over the genocide issue to get the Obama administration to label this as a genocide, and it was our strategy. We knew that we would have to separate these communities. I mean, think of the Jewish Holocaust. 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust in the midst of 55 million, I think it was, maybe you guys know better, 55 million killed in World War II. So coterminous with a genocide, you have a major conflict going on. So there's lots of displaced people, and there's lots of warring factions, and both, the Christians are not exactly in the middle. Like the Jews, they were targeted for eradication. This was part of ISIS's plan for its Islamic State. They wanted to purify the Islamic State. The same thing is happening in northern Nigeria right now with ISIS. The same thing is happening in Sinai, in Egypt, with ISIS, killing the Christians, forcing them out in the most brutal ways.
So these are the Nazis of the Middle East?
Yes. And the infidel, anyone who is not them, and there were, Muslim imams that spoke up in Mosul for the Christians and said, this isn't right, they've always been with us. That guy was killed immediately on the spot by ISIS. So it shuts down all kinds of dissent right away. But the
trying to go around the UN now.
So right? Pence, said we're going to do direct aid, and then it turned out AID was not equipped to do that. I understood that during the Bush administration there was direct aid. There wasn't this dependency on all our aid, humanitarian. It's a bad idea for many reasons to give the UN our humanitarian aid. For one thing, the local community doesn't see that the United States people, taxpayers, giving them all this food and water and electricity and everything else. They see the UN stamped on it. The other thing that we did was I work with the local churches in Nineveh, and they went around, the priests went around, and lay people, and took photos of UN projects that they were supposedly doing in the Christian areas. They published a list. This was back in October. And I was on the Laura Ingraham show and showed it. I showed the photo of the school in one town, Telescope, that had the UN stamp on the outside over a fresh coat of paint, and on the inside was knee-high rubble. no electricity, darkened, shattered windows. Nothing had been done to the inside. It was uninhabitable. You couldn't walk through it. It might have been mined, and it was certainly not being used as a school. So that was one example. We had many examples that the local church helped us put together to track the UN projects and how they were defrauding the American public. There was a policy of the UN to put, in another Christian town in Nineveh, to put all the widows and family members of ISIS militants killed in battle in Mosul in the Christian town. So, of course, none of the Christian displaced would move back there. They refused to move back. They were terrified. And so that town's no longer Christian. There was another town that listed the projects of the UN that you could see on the face of it was totally useless. It was putting a canopy on a municipal building. That was the project. So supposedly, I mean, this is a post-apocalyptic landscape here. We're talking about rubble and, you've seen the pictures of the shattered buildings. That's what these towns look like and still look like. And the churches destroyed throughout Nineveh. And so they were putting canopies on municipal buildings instead of, something useful. So there was no meaningful aid. The church brought someone here to testify, an American lawyer actually who lives there in Erbil and works for the Archbishop in Warda. And he came and testified in Congress 2 years now, saying that there's been no meaningful aid and we're still waiting. And the UN now refuses to publish its list, so it's hard to even track these things to prove that we're still giving them $75 million. We just gave them $75 million, and AID said we're not going to give you any more unless there's transparency and accountability. It is good. But again, Vice President Pence has been a leader on this. He has, he's a busy guy, so he's not going to personally be tracking this, but he has now forced the director of USAID to go over there, and he's over there this second, and he's meeting with 22 groups. And I checked with my both Yazidis and the Christian leadership, and they said, yes, we got a call, we're going to a meeting, we're going to meet with him. So, I mean, that's a positive thing. And the policy has changed. It needs to be implemented. And it's a lesson for all of us. Oh, and simultaneously with all of this, as we were, are we running out of time? These are two different times. Okay.
It's right now 8 o'clock.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Iran is right on that border, and they're encroaching. And they want to create a land bridge to Syria so they can get over the land their troops and their weaponry. And the one, so there was a newspaper article I found over in the Iranian press, the English language Iranian press. I checked it out with the church, and they said, yes, it's true. In a Christian town, Bartella, the Iranians, to great fanfare, the Iranian government opened an Imam Khomeini school and library and mosque in this Christian town. And they had a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and their name is all over the school. And, of course, this is a Khomeini school. This is an Ayatollah school. And, our schools that we're paying for are either not getting built by the UN, and when they do get built, no one knows we did it. It's the UN, this amorphous UN is the good guy. And we're the largest donor in this stabilization and humanitarian, by far. We're the largest contributor. And until now, we have never uttered a word about it. Yeah.
Could you share with us your role in the Institute and the Hudson Institute role in eliminating this problem that we're having?
Well, I founded the Center for Religious Freedom back in '86, and so I had it independent for a while, then I had it for 10 years in Freedom House, and for the last 10 years it's been I brought it to the Hudson Institute. So I raised my own money, and I do my program, and they're very supportive at Hudson, and sometimes there's synergies, and I can work with them. But more importantly, Hudson is right on Pennsylvania Avenue at 12th Street, and I'm able to give a platform to Archbishop Warda. He's been a speaker. I had last week a Syrian Orthodox priest who runs the largest aid agency in Syria, through all the governance of Syria, and to all different groups. I also, what I try to do is be an advocate. As a lawyer, I try to be an advocate, and I write for Fox, National Review, sometimes the Wall Street Journal when they publish me, and speak and try to get the word out. And I have innumerable briefings. The government. I was at USAID last week, and I'll be, part of this. This ministerial that's happening next month. So what I try to do is collect the facts, collect the testimony. It's really not too different from a lawyer putting together a case. Do analysis of the situation based on our notions of religious freedom, meaning American notions, and then publicizing that, developing a strategy for changing policy, meeting with, as a lobbyist, basically, which has a bad word, but I don't actually get paid by any of my clients, but trying to convince our policymakers that the policy needs to be tweaked or changed or shifted, we've had many successes. We've had big successes and small successes. We've gotten people out of prison, but we've also changed a horrific situation that I think was a genocide in Sudan against the South Sudanese. They unfortunately descended into almost permanent conflict with tribal warfare. But before, some people say, it was better before. No, it was not better before. There were 2 million people killed in South Sudan in a jihad for religious reasons. They were 5 million displaced or refugees, so it was not better before. There were slaves, there were slave trains taking people from the south to the north. And that government, which is still the government, invited in Osama bin Laden and gave them shelter. So this was it's a really bad, it's a threat. They've calmed down. They were frightened by what happened with after 9/11, and especially the invasion of Afghanistan. They started cooperating with the U.S. after that. Yeah.
This is a very horrific story. It sounds like you're doing a good job getting the word out through Fox and through EWTN. Are there reasons why we're not hearing any of this on any of the other national news media?
Well, you could probably answer that as well as I or anybody in this room. Your guess is as good as mine. I think there's a hostility towards Christians, and I think that they don't want. I think there's a reluctance or a resistance to seeing Christians as victims, and there's an unwillingness also to say anything negative about any Muslims' activity as well. And I think that is a bad thing because in addition to other reasons, it paints all Muslims as bad. If you can't distinguish the extremists from people who will coexist, then it really, in people's minds, it's very confusing. And so I work with Muslims, and my Saudi reports were done in conjunction with Muslim groups here who objected to what was being said about them and said about and how they portrayed Islam. And I work with the Ahmadiyas in Pakistan as well, who are very terribly persecuted. They're so severely persecuted, they're considered apostates by the government at this point of Pakistan, that they cannot vote. People who want to get a voter's permit, to vote, have to, or a passport, have to denounce the Ahmadiyya community even if you're not Ahmadiyya, if you're just anybody, you have to denounce, in a written pledge, you have to denounce the Ahmadiyya community. And that's a government regulation.
You have an advocate in the U.S. Senate that you work with?
The Senate, there's Senator Langford, Senator Rubio have been helpful. It depends on the issue. Senator Rubio was one of the leaders for the genocide designation.
Okay.
Is there someone in the back?
Who are the Ahmadiyyas? Are they a Muslim group or a different group?
They're a Muslim group, and they actually have a mosque in Maryland, not too far from here, a large mosque. And they're very well educated. They renounced jihad. They're peaceful, and they're from Pakistan originally. And the persecution has spread against them from Pakistan. At first, they were part of the government of Pakistan when they split from India, and they've been demonized since then for their views, and they have been, and that demonization has spread to Northern Africa and even Indonesia. So they're burned, they're persecuted, it's very brutal. And they are very well educated. They're scientists. One of the first Nobel Prize in science was for a Muslim was awarded to an Ahmadiyya from Pakistan, and he had been driven out of Pakistan because of this intolerance, and had done his work in London. And when he died, he wanted to be buried in his homeland of Pakistan. So he went back, they took his body back, they put it on a tombstone, and on the tombstone it said the first Muslim Nobel awardee, and that could not be tolerated. And the court case was brought, and that was erased from his tombstone by the courts, by the magistrates. Yeah. Yeah.
The Knights of Columbus were also instrumental in getting this designation of the Christian persecution as genocide.
Yeah, we worked in coalition with them.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and so how has that affected the conversation, the policy making, and how has that affected, in a substantive way, the situation on the ground?
It was a strategy to elevate these communities from the mass of millions of displaced in the Middle East. There's a big war going on in Syria to this day, and in Iraq there was then too because of ISIS. So to highlight that these people were suffering deliberate, and that's a legal element of the term genocide is intent to eradicate in whole or in part. And so we said that this fits that definition. ISIS, you heard me read what they said about Rome. I mean, this was directed at Christians. They were going to take over Christianity and forcibly convert everybody. And they were going to burn your cross, is the way they put it. And so the Knights were the heavyweights. They had money, and they were able to put on TV ads, and they do a lot of charitable work. They don't do a lot of international work, but they made an exception for this, and they were able to raise $12 million to give to Archbishop Orta for the support of these people. Aid to the Church in Need is another group that gave even more than that, and they're a pontifical group. They have an outpost in New York, but their main work is done in Germany. And they're a great group. They also, if you want to learn more, Aid to the Church in Need has a website, and they have a map and a report that they issue on persecution every year, and put out other press articles. And that's where I saw, in fact, I went on their website to prepare for tonight, and I saw the Bahrain, I had heard talk about this Catholic cathedral going up in the Arabian Peninsula, and then I said, lo and behold, it's actually groundbreaking this month in Bahrain. And that was on their website. So they're an invaluable resource, Aid to the Church in Need. Again, pontifical, and so they're kosher. And
They're based in Germany?
They're based in Frankfurt. They're based in Germany. And they have an office, in New York. They have an office by the EU in Brussels, and they have an office in London. So they're a big, well-funded organization. The Open Doors is an evangelical organization that also does a list, a famous list every year of the worst persecution of Christians. They do the 50 worst persecutors. And so they have a list on the website that is a good resource as well. There's there's not a single one-stop shop for this issue. There's AsiaNews.it is great for China. It's a Catholic missionary source, and that's very informative about China. Less so for some of the other countries. The U.S. State Department, this is another thing that came out of the International Religious Freedom Act of 20 years ago, was mandating that the State Department do an annual report, country by country, on religious freedom. And it's, so you can go on the internet, at state.gov, and if you just Google Religious Freedom Report, it'll pop up for every year, and have every country. And it's chock full of details, of facts, not nuts.
That's okay, chock full of crazy people.
No, it's not chock full of crazy people. It's a very valuable report.
I know.
It's almost a welter of detail. So, but you'll find everything will be in it. It's just, yeah.